All right, guys, welcome back to Unhinged. I'm Marcus, the managing editor,
I'm Chris, the opinion editor.
and Quinn is in the house, the former opinion editor. He doesn't have a mic, so he's just smiling awkwardly at me. What?
Let's just narrate what Quinn's doing for the rest of this time.
Yeah,
Quinn types, does that thing where he squints and looks at a wall and then types some more.
Quinn is doing that gesture where he's like cutting.
He
he's throwing
throws
a
an imaginary
ball.
football.
Okay,
His dad is proud of him once more.
so we missed a week. We missed last week.
It was Marcus's fault.
It was a communication issue. I thought we were just not doing a podcast. Apparently, we were supposed to do it another day. That's my bad. We're back. We have a main, a secondary, a column.
What a surprise.
Chris wrote again, which I don't understand. He has like 10 writers and he writes every week.
Yeah.
But fair enough.
I like power.
Good for him. Good for him. He's doing the job that, nobody else can, apparently.
Oh, man. I wish someone else would.
Let's start with the column, actually.
Rivka's?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Rivka says she's a senior staff writer. That's wrong, first of all. I'm just pointing that out.
Oh, do I have to put her as... Oh, yeah.
I guess, yeah. Okay. So this week, what did she do this week?
She did the most this week.
She did the most this week. Yeah, her first draft was pretty intense.
Yeah. I've never had to ask copy if we can have the N-word in a piece before.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting issue because we had a... Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because our A&E had the word shit all over the place.
That was intense.
Yeah.
So her column about basically two Kazakhstani women, or at least one Kazakhstani woman, kind of being hung out to dry because she used the lyrics to a Kanye West song in like an invitation letter. Sorry, the picture was posted to Instagram. Everybody in the United States were like, "Oh my god!" Because the song is the N-word in Paris by
Kanye West. Good song.
By Kanye West. It's a good song, yeah. But so she posted that. I don't know if she posted it. I think it was like in her Instagram stories. That's what I saw.
But the way that she described it to me was that she sent these letters out and someone else saw it.
Oh, okay.
And then
Someone
took
who
a
got
picture
it.
of it.
Someone who got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Quinn has agreed with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's fact checking more than I am on our pieces.
He has all on speed dial. That's oh yeah. So this kind of raises a question where Rivka's argument, at least, is that someone who has been living or is born in a country other than the United States and is not accustomed to the significance of that word in like
the U.S. context,
general culture, like
general
the cultural environment of the U.S. should not be basically like attacked like this for using that word. And then she goes into a rant about dreadlocks, which I'm really confused about. But the dreadlocks is another argument that dreadlocks are kind of like its own cultural thing in Eastern European countries, in Russia, not Russia, but Eastern European countries at least, in that when the United States saw it, they would be saying like, oh my God, like people wearing dreadlocks, like white people wearing dreadlocks, that's cultural appropriation, which Rivka says it's not, because it's not in the same cultural like ensemble. I don't really know how to say it, but it's like those two cultures do not mesh ever. So for people in that...
Well, they meshed originally. That's
no,
how,
I know. But I mean, like, people from like Georgia would not know... Georgia as a country, by the way, for people listening. Georgia as a country would not know like what is culturally like okay in the United States. Mm-hmm. Like they would not be like, oh my God, dreadlocks. That's not like, that's her argument basically. I have a few things to say about this.
Jump in.
Should I? Okay. Yeah. The one comment, like the overall comment I made about this was, especially about the first part, about that, I don't know if she's a fashion designer, but she's that person who sent the letter apparently is linked to fashion. And I was kind of like thinking, oh, well, if she's linked to fashion, if she's linked to all these people that, a lot of them are European, obviously, but a lot of people in fashion also come from the United States. It's like, it's not like she's like that one like little girl that grew up in Kazakhstan in a small village and lived there her own life. Like that girl, that woman, I assume, I don't know how old she is, but she has traveled. She has probably met people from the United States. I feel like she's more like culturally connected to the United States than just someone who like is from there. She's like more of a player in like an international like stage, I guess, in that sense, where it's like she has met all these people. So I would kind of disagree with that argument. Also, I don't know how big her following on Instagram is, but I'm assuming it's very big. I'm assuming a lot of that following obviously is from like Russia and those neighboring countries, but a lot of those are probably also American followers. When your following is not like 100 people, but like 1 million, I don't know exactly the number, but that's, I'm just gonna spitball, and like you have to kind of recognize that like 10% of these people might be American. I don't know. I thought her argument was more like, oh, well, she grew up in Kazakhstan, so it doesn't count. And I was kind of like, well, she did grow up in Kazakhstan, but at the same time, you know, like she's been traveling. She was in Paris. At that time, she probably met people who were, you're looking at me like I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like a good thing or bad. Okay. But so that was like my main, not a cause of concern. I understand her argument, but at the same time, like I feel like that example is not one to like put this argument in a good light, in a sense that it's like, I don't know, if someone who's lived in Kazakhstan their whole life posted a picture, I wouldn't mind. But if that person has been like, probably has been to the United States before, etc., then it's just like, the argument is kind of like,
I mean, okay, so I see where you're coming from in that she like participates in like a global industry, so she should have some kind of awareness of like global issues. But I don't think this is like one of those things that's so readily cognizant in like American culture. It's one of those things that's like not really talked about until like recently in our own culture. So I think to expect
to
like,
use the N-word?
not to not use the N-word, but like the issue of cultural appropriation. And,
okay.
And yeah, especially in a sector where like, as she said, there's such a small population of Black people. Like this concept of like misappropriation of like their culture is not really quite as prevalent and not as like readily available in like their collective cultural consciousness. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that technically, I agree with her point that this shouldn't be like a reason for people. But I'm just thinking that this example is. It kind of can. It can
I
go
think the
both
example
on
actually
both
works pretty
sides.
well because
really?
it has its own cultural context within Russia and like the surrounding area. So I feel like when people think of dreads, they're not prone to consider it a Black like related thing in that culture because that's not the culture that they built around it.
I understand a dread argument.
Yeah.
I'm mostly focusing on the first one. I didn't have an issue with a dread argument. I think.
Did you just say you hated the dreads?
What?
Either right now or before we started, you were like,
No.
the dreads, which I don't understand. Roll the tapes.
Oh, no. No, I said, like, I don't understand, like, I didn't understand in the construction of her article how that came up.
There's no
that was like, it was kind of like weirdly constructed in that sense. I don't not understand the argument. I think that argument stands for its own. I was mostly thinking like the N-word. That was my point. But I understand. I would be the same way. I mean, I've lived here for a long time, but when I came here, it was kind of like, suddenly I can't say certain things and I can't do certain things a certain way because of this or that. And that's kind of like something I haven't like been educated with and when I was younger and stuff like that. So it's definitely something where if you're not American, you don't necessarily understand it right away or even completely, you don't understand it. But I feel like the N-word is like one of those things where it's just like, you just can't say that. And it's like, regardless of, I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting.
Well, I mean, even like our own culture, like there's the debate of like, can you say it if you're referencing something? Like that was like a thing that people tried to use as a justification for using it. It's like, if I'm singing along to a rap song, like, is it okay?
Can you?
I say no, but
no, you can't.
But she's not going to be familiar with that kind of like discourse because she's maybe not a Kazakhstani village, tiny little girl, but she's like not someone who's been integrated into those like cultural norms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely understand where she's coming from, and I think that the idea of like cultural appropriation is still like relevant.
That's fair. Yeah.
But like the expectation should not be that she's always going to know what's relevant in other cultures. So that's where I agree with. Like I think it's still like problematic because there is still that history of
such an
interconnection.
Extreme example too. That's the thing. It's like
true.
It's like if she had been wearing dreads, people would be like, what? Like she's a crazy like young girl, whatever. Like I don't know, like some they're gonna come up with some like dumb excuse or whatever and characterize it as someone who just doesn't know. But since it's the N-word, people are just like jumped on it. I feel like that's the thing.
Yeah. Do you think if she said faggot, it'd be different? If there was a song that was like Faggots in Paris, sounds like a great song. Mariah Carey's doing it.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Just a fun little thought experiment. You go to Kazakhstan, call someone a faggot, and see what they do.
I don't think they care there.
Yeah. They probably don't even know what the word means.
They probably.
What's a
They're probably really
faggy
low
word
at-
for Kazakhstan? What's the
I don't know how to speak.
what's the Russian word for faggot? I don't know. Anyway, never mind.
We'll have to ask Refka.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that.
I mean, no. So yeah, and I think I understand. It was just I felt like it was such a very like specific example
Yeah.
that people get riled up about the N-word a lot, understandably so,
Yeah.
and I feel like that was like one of those things. Like I can also understand why people called her out on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I understand. I just think like the outrage was like not proportional to the crime.
I don't know how connected that person is. That's my problem. All the links that Revka put on her articles were written in Russian, so I was like, I cannot fact check that story. I have no idea what's going
they
on.
They were Russian or they were Reddit.
Yeah,
Love
either Reddit
it.
or Russian. But I was like, I don't really know anything about that girl. You know, like maybe that girl was like a major figure that has worked with American companies before. You know, like that would make it different than if it's just like someone who was, by the way, invited to a fashion show in Paris.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the thing. So I don't know about that, so I can't really, say anything. But let's move on to let's do your story last. Let's move on to Standing Behind Student Unions by Adriana. I don't really have anything to say about this story, mostly because I read it and I was like, oh, well, I don't really have any edits to do.
Yeah.
Because it flowed perfectly.
Adriana
and
killing it this week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a really, really well written story. Do you want to walk us through this?
Dude, I haven't read this in so long.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I'll walk you through it because apparently Chris doesn't know how to do this job.
We already knew that, Marcus. Come on.
So it's basically calling out the UC system, or was it the UC system or UC Regents?
I've been reborn in terms of my knowledge.
Reborn.
So.
Okay.
So the idea behind this one is that unions have historically been very beneficial in improving the working conditions and wages of workers across industries. And the idea is that grad students and undergraduate TAs and people who work on campus are not allowed to unionize because they're not really listed as employees. So
due to laws passed by the
Yeah.
UC Regents.
yes, and then like the attempts to unionize have all been opposed vehemently throughout the UC system, which is, as she says, unfair because students are so integral to the part of like the university that like includes them, like their education, the actual like running of dining halls and things like that, of all the markets. A lot of that's done by student workers, but they're not allowed to unionize, and they don't have bargaining power. They're not allowed to join unions if they're employed. So there's just a lot of like confrontation with them, even though they're kind of like an overworked minority in terms of like workers. They're not allowed to unionize.
It's kind of surprising. Also, like, I don't know if it was like Arkansas or Alabama or something like that. I'd be like, it's Arkansas or Alabama. But this is like California. It's kind of like
We're supposed to be more progressive.
yeah, it's kind of like
Or
surprising to
above
see
it.
that much opposition to the idea of unionizing.
I mean, if I was like running the UC system, fuck
Yeah,
the unions.
no,
like,
of course
I
you
wouldn't
don't.
want either.
Of course
yeah.
you don't want your workers to unionize because they're gonna come after you and demand more wages, which I honestly have no problem with. Like they probably should get more wages and stuff like that. But like if you're at the head of the UC system, of course you're thinking to yourself like, let's not make this a big deal. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's like, yeah, UC students should be able to unionize.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
not? Like, yeah, that's the argument. There's nothing really to say
Yeah,
about
I
it.
mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's like, I don't know. There's not really a whole lot of like pushback on this. Like, yeah, student workers should be able to unionize.
Well, it is important to like mention that this comes like after it's been like a pretty rocky year for like the youth system as it
And its
comes
workers.
to workers
Yeah,
and how
lots of
they're
protests.
basically fighting for the fact that we live, especially here at UCSD, but also like at UCLA or Berkeley in spaces that are pretty expensive, that where prices are increasing and those workers are being paid minimum wage, which is better than in other states, but also not enough to live in a city like SF or San Diego if you live there. And we just mean like workers who are like full-time workers, like adults, right? But that also applies to students who are trying to obviously pay off loans or pay for school or that kind of stuff. And it's the same issue because, prices keep increasing. If it's tuition or living prices, same thing. It just continues to increase. And if you're not unionized, you lose all your bargaining power. And the fact is that TAs, undergraduate TAs, graduate TAs don't necessarily have the time to think about this because, they're obviously doing their TA jobs or working at the markets on top of being a 20 hour per week student, at least, right? Being in class. And I mean, they're losing out. I don't know exactly how much they're losing out on. I don't know the details about it, but that's definitely a thing that is surprising to me that there's no unions. It's how are we supposed to, go head to head with the regions or go head to head with UCOP or whatever when it comes to workers' right if there's no workers association
Coalition,
union. It's already difficult enough for people who work in the UC hospitals or the UC workers to get heard. We see them on library walks sometimes, etc. And we cover those protests. But it's on top of that, if you don't even take the adults, you take the students, then it's a whole other problem. And they don't even have those unions to support them, or they can't go on strike. They can't, they lose their job if they go on strike. No one ever thinks about that. No one ever thinks about going on strike, as a student worker. And it's just I don't know, it just seems odd.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, this is a better state to be a
of
marginalized
course,
worker.
Of course. We're not saying we're all oh my God,
totally.
but at the same time, it's
But you lose the collective bargaining power that unions provide. So some shit, man.
I don't know. I feel it's also been a trend, right? The union, percentage of people who are in a union.
Oh, yeah.
I think I saw that it's continually decreasing in the United States. So that's also a thing, but.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where you would think that there would be that kind of direct proportional relationship where we've seen historically that unions have been directly impacting the welfare of workers, so to speak, but it's an inverse relationship where participation goes down because people feel they don't need to anymore. It's they don't want to have to pay towards these unions. They don't want to have to follow these rules that go with these unions. They don't have to go with the regulations on employment and things like that come with unions sometimes. Yeah. So sometimes it's just easier to be okay with whatever circumstances you're in and hope that nothing happens that challenges your circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? No. I think that's it.
It's pretty straightforward.
It's a really good article.
Yeah. I still don't know who these people are, but.
Yeah. Let's go on to the secondary for this week, written by yours truly, Christopher Robertson.
That's me.
That's you.
It's my name. Don't wear it out.
Let's rip into this. No, just kidding. It was a good article. I have a few issues with it because it talks about Europe.
Down with France.
and I'm very sensitive about Europe, apparently. No, but so your argument starts with food customs, and then it evolves into a discussion of how San Diego versus certain countries in Europe integrate immigrants. We've discussed that when I was editing it. You said this would only be about immigrants and not refugees, which is a whole other issue, but also kind of linked. It's kind of
a little bit.
Well, when it comes to integration of refugees and immigrants in Europe, especially, it's linked. But so make your case why food laws in Europe are bad or something like that.
That's it. That's the whole piece.
No,
let's just stop it there. End of podcast.
I'm not finding my words.
Okay, so the way that I started off is by I noticed that there was a series of legislation in various European countries. France, Italy, and Denmark were the more prolific people in terms of their legislation against what they called quote-unquote ethnic foods, by which they mean not French, Italian, Danish, so on and so on. And these arguments for passing these legislations were always kind of couched in this rhetoric around the economy about how like an influx of immigrants would lead to this or that effect. One of the ones that was most common was that diluting of their culture was a threat if we allowed so many immigrants to come and create their restaurants, their stores, set up neighborhoods and things like that. And because that's like not what people come to Italy for. They don't go to Italy for Middle Eastern culture. So they were worried that like if we let all these immigrants come and establish some kind of like cultural basis within our nation, that our tourism will be affected because people are not getting the Italian experience that they want anymore. Another thing that they did was that just the generic kind of anti-immigrant type of economic arguments where they're taking away jobs, they're lowering wages, things like that. So I wanted to start off first by like debunking the idea that these immigrants are negatively impacting like the native people's economic prowess. And then I wanted to get rid of that because for me this was like an entirely cultural clash, like it obviously is when it's against immigrants, and it's just kind of like coaxed in this language that's surrounding economics because that's a more like not PC, but like more socially acceptable way to say down with immigrants, you know what I mean? So I started by kind of like debunking a little bit the idea that immigrants are negatively impacting the economy, and then I moved to like why this is like a cultural trend that is like pervasive in the way that Europe integrates their immigrants.
So and then you go into I mean, it's not the conclusion, but it's like the like the main focus, where you kind of you move on from that and say it's all about culture.
Yeah.
The tensions between immigrants and natives are exclusively cultural. Yes, it's very true. But I think my issue with this piece in the beginning when I first read it, and it's evolved since then, but I felt like the way you portrayed the United States and European countries was like saying like, oh, we do things differently here. And of course, there's some dissimilarities, but I've always felt like overall there's this idea of having, especially in recent years in Europe too, but in recent years in the United States, this idea of having like a culture, right? American culture. American culture has never been American culture. It's always been cultures from 150
Mishmash.
different countries. That's always been the thing about America. But in the recent years, there's been an uptick in the mentions of
American.
We need to protect our American culture. Well, it's the same thing in France, and that was kind of like how I saw it. And I was like, yeah, it's definitely cultural. But I didn't really see how you made a distinction between how the U.S. handled it and how France handled it, except for that food part, which I think is a fair point. There's a lot of things said about French food, Danish cuisine, also Italian food, like the whole pasta and pizza, or in France like the gastronomy, or like Danish like pastries, or whatever you want. This idea that like they don't want to dilute it, or that's a stupid argument for sure. It's not because other people come in, they're not going to take your job. Like if you're a good cook, you're a good cook. Like that's not the issue. So I agree with that part, but it's like the second part of your piece that had like a little bit more issues with. So if you want to like try to reiterate it.
One of the biggest issues that I had with writing this piece, like I had to rewrite it like 3 times because there were just too many like moving parts. What I found was that like obviously the way that we approach immigrants is not unilaterally good. And I didn't want to present it
overall
as...
it's bad.
Yeah,
Let's
overall,
just say
yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
Like, there's not I just couldn't find a way to reconcile the fact that there was legislation that targeted immigrants in the U.S. as well, and there's instances of just blatant violence that exists in Europe as well. And it's not just kind of like that like stark contrast that kind of appeared in my piece between... In America, we just kind of have like more blatant examples of our cultural tensions that aren't kind of like couched in this language of legislation, whereas in Europe, it's more of a legislatively based type of aggression towards immigrants. And that's one of those things I couldn't really reconcile because there's examples of the opposite in each of these areas. But I just found that some are more prevalent here than in Europe and vice versa, based on my research. So I tried to include that obviously America is not good to its immigrants.
No, of course.
Yeah, but it's just hard to draw a line across an ocean when we're both like Western cultures.
Yeah.
Europe and in North
Predominantly
America.
white, predominantly.
Yeah, we have similar values, even if like the way that we express them are different. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
I was about to say predominantly white, predominantly Christian. One thing that I think could add kind of like, I'm not saying like I'm going to educate you, but I think that would go along with what you just said is that a lot of like the racial component, and I feel like the racial component of immigration ties into the cultural component of immigration, where it's like if white people immigrate, nobody cares, and if brown people or Arab people immigrates, somebody says something, it's like, oh my God, culturally they're gonna like end us or whatever. So in the U.S., the availability of racial component based data, and I remember because I wrote about it for the Guardian like a long time ago, but it was in France. There's almost no racially based data available. So a lot of the like public outcry or like are kind of just reserved for some people from like the extreme, like the red extremists who are like saying like, oh my God, like, spreading fake news or saying that halal restaurants are going to end the world or whatever it is. Whereas in the United States, it's much, much easier to make a point that, violence against black people has surged since the election. Violence against Muslims has surged since the election, which is like a very, very like public display of that xenophobia and that racism against immigrants and against people of color. Whereas in France, I'm taking France as an example, obviously, but I think mostly in Europe, it's much more complicated to frame it that way. The one country where it's framed that way is Belgium. Belgium has a very like complicated history with its very strong immigration. But overall, I feel like it's much more like toned down in the sense that it's not being portrayed as a
racially motivated crime.
Yes, in that sense. So I think that's for the part where it's like, oh my God, like the United States are much more like present or more like committed is a bad word, but you know what I mean. Like they're much more like those are all violences done against immigrant and very, very public about it. Whereas in France or most generally
subtle
in Europe,
racism.
It's still racism. I'm not saying it's like less, but in a sense, it's like racism that isn't categorized as racism because of the way because of historically how like France gathers data, for example. That's just the way it is. I think like if you mix the two and if you like kind of like balanced the two ways of doing things, I think you would basically find the same results. But the way the information is treated in the media and everything is so different that you find one representation of it here in the United States and another representation in Europe. Where in Europe it's mostly done through legal ways, like you said in your piece. So I think that like that kind of brings context to what you say in that. Not that last paragraph, but the one right before, where you said that the United States are much more
blatant.
Blatant. Blatant is a good word.
The piece that kind of operates under like an assumption that when I put ethnic and foreign in quotes, it's implied that like this means like not white.
When it's people of color, of course, because the
if
same thing happens against like black people. It's like. People are like, oh, black culture is taking over. Oh my God, black music is taking over. Well, like, just, okay, deal with it. That's good. That's a good thing. Mix and match. It's good. Like, there's no, but it's very different. It's very different for someone to say, like, if someone here was complaining about black music taking over, and if someone in France would complain about black music taking over, it'd be perceived very, very differently, and that participates in what you were saying. So that was my little tidbit.
Your 2 cents.
That it makes more sense now. I understand. I'm still mad at this article because it targeted France, but France has a lot of flaws and not dealing with
a lot of flaws. So many flaws.
And not dealing correctly with immigration and racism is definitely at the top of the list, somewhere in the top 5. I don't know, but so that's definitely a thing. It's just dealt with very differently. And like you said, it's a cultural element where culturally in France it's dealt differently than culturally in the United States. Also, just in the whole country. Yeah. Anything else?
I'm good.
Yeah. Also, something I don't know. I just want to add this because I just thought of it, but it's very interesting. It's very like I've come to compare the United States and how they deal with things to France and Europe as a general thing. It's so interesting because you could have an argument that says that, you know, like how California deals with things is very different than from like Alabama, for example, right? And then you have the same exact thing in Europe because it's basically the whole Europe is the side of the United States. I feel like it's interesting to compare the two because of this, because you can make an argument and that we're like in a bubble here in San Diego and we've experienced things from the California point of view, and that we'd probably think differently or write differently if we were not from California.
Yeah, if we were born and raised in Alabama.
Yeah, well, that's just the way it is, right? And then you could make an argument that, you know, maybe some countries in Europe are dealing much better with this kind of thing than France or Italy.
Or Alabama.
Or Alabama. Alabama's in Europe now. That's interesting.
I hope.
I hope
wish.
not.
Can we ship it there?
No, we can keep it.
Please?
He can keep it. We keep our Georgia
basically
and you keep
double the
yours.
landmass of England. Just staple it to him. Do you want to go over the World Front window?
What the hell happened?
What? I guess it's not World Front window. This is a different comic.
It is? It's not David?
No.
Who is Immigrant?
They asked to remain nameless.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. Oh, let's talk about it. This one is... Yeah, I remember this one.
So, Bad Triangles by Immigrant. Immigrant is apparently the name of a person now.
Lovely name.
They're actually
It's Scottish.
immigrants or... It's Scottish. You're making triangles look bad. You're literally Nazis.
You gotta, like, describe it.
There's 3 triangles. I don't know what to say.
These are, like, identifiable things.
They are?
Okay, so there's 3 triangles. They're all kind of, like,
There's a British
anthropomorphized.
posh person in the middle.
Oh, my God, Marcus, you're absolutely killing me. Okay, so there's 3 triangle-shaped
You have
things.
your own paper. God damn it.
There are 3 triangle-based... No, I don't. There are 3 triangle-based things standing in this comic. On the left one is the like, triangle, like, triad that is from Zelda, yeah. I don't know what it's called. Never mind. I can't remember the name of it. But then the middle one is the Illuminati triangle. And then the one on the right is the Identity Europa symbol.
That's the Illuminati triangle?
Yes, it's like the
Oh,
pyramid
it has an
with the
eye.
Come on, Marcus.
It looks like a British posh person.
He's wearing you look like this guy. You look like this triangle.
Yeah,
That's you.
I look like a British posh person. Okay, so
Yeah, we get it,
Illuminati,
you're European, God.
Illuminati, Zelda apparently, and Identity Europa. Okay.
So reading the comments from left to right, they say the Zelda one is saying you're making triangles look bad. You literal Nazis. Nazi spelled with a T. Is that a thing that people do?
It's not.
It's silly.
It's not.
Yeah. And then the middle one is just saying, oh geez.
That's a British posh person.
It's the Illuminati, Marcus. They're gonna get you for not knowing who they are.
That's fine.
And then the Identity Europa one says, I don't like immigrants. I don't want to solve my own problems. It's wild. They wildin'.
It's a party.
Yeah, so this is in response to Identity Europa kind of skulking around on campus.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, Identity Europa is a shithole.
I don't get the Zelda part, but okay.
There are other triangles, Marcus.
Oh. This is very confusing.
It was not. But anyway.
What if you don't... Okay, whatever. What if you don't know any of the symbols? You just
We
see
never
3
know what
triangles.
any of the comics are. It's okay.
No, now it makes sense. Well, actually, no, the Zelda part still doesn't make sense.
Also, yeah, why is he shitting on Zelda? Because the title of it is Bad Triangles. I like Zelda.
Well, are they Illuminati bad? I don't know. Oh, I'm...
If you say
No,
yes...
never mind. I'm confusing them with
Parker,
Anonymous
you
with the
can't be
hackers. Never mind.
You think of the Packers?
No, not the Packers.
Like the cheese heads? Like the triangle
Yes.
cheese heads? Yes.
That's smart. Damn.
I'm going to get one of those for the Guardian.
I mean, yeah. White people causing shit once again.
So Identity Europa is just like a shithole of like white supremacy, I guess, and it's an organization that likes to like skulk around now for some reason.
See, and another organization that says that like American culture is apparently European cultures, which I didn't know about.
European-esque.
I sure as hell don't see it, but okay.
Dipped their toes into
Good for
us.
you guys.
Sounds hot.
If you think that that's a thing, just because you're like 5 generations ago, you guys like left Scotland doesn't mean that you're entitled to
I love how you picked the
my
whitest
culture.
country in all of Europe,
What?
Scotland.
Ireland. I don't know.
I mean,
I
they're,
feel
they're
like
all like Irish or something. There's
I
the
feel like
whitest
here, like
motherfuckers.
everybody's like 1/5 like Scottish, 1/5 Irish, and then they're like 2/3. No, that doesn't add up. But then suddenly it's like,
2/5 plus 2/3.
okay, let me
It's
do
fine.
my little rant. Okay. No. Okay, so
Calculator. I haven't even met her. Sorry. Go on.
are you good?
I'm done.
So about this whole idea that U.S. culture is European culture, or that like people in the U.S. who were born in the U.S. from like generations of immigrants that immigrated in the 1850s still think they're somehow European. No, don't. You're
That's
not.
the end of that. Thanks for listening.
That's all I have to say. Like, just because you're 1/64 French doesn't make you French. Like, if you don't know how to speak the language or don't identify with the culture, just stay where you are, which is the United States, which has its own like set and like mix and rules and cultural elements that define what the United States are, which I assure you is very different from what Europe is. And just don't take Europeans into this. It's your own problem. No, that's not. But overall, that's the idea of identity Europa, is saying like America is like based on like the white immigrants from Europe that came 200 years ago, right? That's the idea. It's like American culture is that it's that white culture from white countries from Western Europe. By the way, Irish people were not considered white by the United States until like super late.
But they're the whitest people in Europe.
No,
Other
but
than
like
maybe the Scottish.
yeah, but that's like just don't use that argument. That argument is racist, fascist, whatever you want. It's dumb.
It's dumb.
It has no grounds because U.S. culture has evolved and has been mixed with so many different elements that it just is not like European culture. And also, there's no European culture. Every single country has different sets of rules and laws and cultural elements and food and whatever you want.
Read my article.
Yeah, that ties in pretty well with your article.
Denmark
But
is not
that was my little rant.
Also, when I first saw this, I thought it was about steak, because the Identity Europa badge looks like a T-bone. Yeah.
I thought it was Doritos at first, like the Zelda thing,
Oh, I could see that.
and then the British posh person in the middle, and then
It's a very fancy Dorito.
it's a very fancy
How they
Dorito.
market Doritos.
It looks really
England.
good.
Yeah.
In England,
I love
that's how
eyes
they-
on my Doritos.
That's how they
Make them
market
look
it.
at me.
Anything else to add?
I think I'm good.
Yeah.
Down with Identity Europa.
Yeah.
Up with not banning foods
Student
that
worker
are ethnic.
unions.
Up with student worker unions. Yeah, go
Yeah.
Caesar.
Go what?
Caesar. Chavez.
Why? Oh, I thought you meant like
The salad?
no, not the actual Caesar, the OG one.
Yeah, let's just stab people who don't like unions.
I was really confused by that.
Well,
I don't know.
Brutus is fighting against the unions.
Is Brutus Janet Napolitano? Okay, yeah. Well, if you want to get involved with this, I'm pretty sure you can. I don't know. What are you complaining about? What? No. Oh, okay. Fine. You want to talk?
I was just listening to the commentary on Caesar and Brutus, and
Yeah.
I was realizing that a Lauryn Hill lyric about Caesar and Brutus is biblical, of course, which isn't surprising because a lot of Lauryn Hill's music has biblical allusions, but the line just has a lot of new meaning in the sense of Caesar and Brutus.
What's Lauryn Hill new album called?
She doesn't have a new album.
Oh, what's her most recent album called?
I don't know if she's had an album out recently. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill came out in, I think, 1997.
Oh, really? Oh, shit.
and then
she's
she had
old.
an MTV Unplugged.
Oh, well, she's made it.
I
Oh, I
mean-
actually just saw something on Facebook about her earlier. I can't remember what it was. Maybe she's doing
Yo,
a
guys, that was
concert.
20 years ago. Drop it.
I guess she's probably not touring then. I don't know. I saw something. Oh, maybe that was it. Oh, really? Oh, okay.
She was probably late to the concert 2 hours.
Okay, that's it for this week's episode of
Buy tickets
Unhinged.
to Lauryn Hill's concert, apparently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll all be attending. No, not me, actually. No.
Ugh,
I have better
Marcus
things
is
to do.
homophobic.
What?
You heard two gay guys talking about Lauryn Hill, and you're like, pass. I'm just gonna go back to France where we're not gay and we don't like our immigrants.
Okay, this is wrong on so many different levels.
Homophobia is wrong.
Yeah, it is.
Denounce it.
I totally agree.
Okay, go see Lauryn Hill. Bye.
Yeah, we'll be back next week.